So first I'm going to introduce Katie. Katie uses she, her pronouns and is a native of Birmingham, Alabama. She is a co-founder of Burdock Book Collective, an intersectional feminist bookstore that seeks to cultivate radically inclusive organizing and community space, and co-runs the Alabama Books to Prisons Project. Katie is a queer farmer, activist, and student of mental health counseling who reads voraciously about prison abolition, decolonizing therapy, and queer identity. In her free time, she can be found baking, experimenting with natural dyes, and writing about her grandmother. So welcome, Katie. We're so excited to be here with you. And welcome, Becca. So Becca, who also uses she, her pronouns, grew up in West Virginia and now lives in Southern California with her husband and 2 children. Her short stories have been featured in 2 writing block anthologies, Inlandia, a literary journal, and a short guide to finding your first home in the United States. On Home is her first novel, and we are really excited to be able to celebrate it with you tonight. I want to encourage folks, wherever you're watching from, feel free to let us know in the chat. And if you've already read On Home, we love to hear what you like about a book. You can, of course, at any time ask a question for Becca. There's an Ask a Question tab at the bottom center of the screen, so you can put your question there. Or if you're on your phone, you can put it in the chat, and I'll move it over to make that a little bit easier for you. I really want Katie to start us out by telling everyone a little bit about the Burdock Book Collective. As many longtime Charis friends know, for a long time we were seeing a devolution of the feminist bookstore movement. We were losing more bookstores than we were gaining. And in the last 5 years, especially in the South, there's been an incredible resurgence of feminist bookstores and sort of this overall feminist and queer organizing that's happening across the South. And it's really exciting for us. And Burdock is one of our favorite places. So we're thrilled that you're here, and this sort of happened serendipitously. But Katie, if you could tell folks a little bit more about Burdock Book Collective and what you have going on, and then we'll get right into it with On Home.
Thanks, ER. I'm so excited to be here tonight to talk with Becca, and also just excited to be partnering with one of Burdock's mentor bookstores. So I'm gonna just tell you briefly about Burdock before I start the conversation with Becca. So I co-founded Burdock Book Collective with my dear friend Megan Lyle in 2018. We're a volunteer-run, not-for-profit, intersectional feminist bookstore that seeks to cultivate radically inclusive community and organizing space in Birmingham, Alabama. While we curate and sell a selection of feminist books, we also host author talks, community groups, art workshops, and book clubs. We have a feminist science fiction reading group that meets on the first Wednesday of every month. And now it's sort of hybrid. We're doing some in-person meetings. And then on Wednesday of this week, we met virtually on Zoom. But it's a group of dedicated creatives and queers that get together to talk about sci-fi, but they also spend time imagining the Birmingham and the world that we want to live in. And we're just really proud to have this group that's lasted for 2 years and lasted through COVID. We also co-run the Alabama Books to Prisons project with a core group of volunteers across the state of Alabama. We facilitate connection by matching people inside prisons with pen pals on the outside, and we also work to fulfill their book requests. Since starting the project late last year, we've sent over 70 books to people incarcerated in Alabama prisons, and we're currently putting together a newsletter with essays, poems, recipes, and art submitted by our pen pals on the inside, and we'll distribute it to all the prisons where we have connections. And we're also partnering with the University of Alabama Law School to create a legal pamphlet for our pen pals. So if you're interested in signing up to be a pen pal or donating to the project, you can do that on our website. We operate out of the Quaker meeting space that's in Avondale, a neighborhood in Birmingham. We don't currently have open hours because of COVID, but we do have random pop-ups and workshops there that you can find out about on Instagram or Facebook. So that's all about Burdock. Now we can do the exciting part, talking to Becca. Hi, Becca.
Hi, Katie.
I'm so excited to talk with you tonight about your book.
Me too.
I want to offer you congratulations on its publication and on creating such a beautiful piece of literature.
Thank you. Your note to me was like, I'm just saving it forever. It was so special to me. So thank you.
I felt so grateful that I got to read it before it was released. And I just really, the whole time I was reading it, I saw myself in the story, in the characters and the relationships between them, in the place. Even though I'm not from West Virginia, it felt very much like Alabama. Also in this like struggle to be at ease with one's queerness, the feelings of non-belonging that span generations, and then also like the obvious one is the struggle to find and claim home for yourself. So it was really powerful, and I'm so grateful to have read it. Yeah. So my first question for you tonight, when I was preparing for this evening, I read a few things that you had written previously about On Home, and so I hope that I'm rightfully assuming that there's a lot of you and your own story in the book.
Yeah, so there started out being a lot more of my story in the book, or it started out being a lot closer to my story. But then through the editing process, I realized that I really needed to kind of make a lot more narrative sense, because, life isn't like just a straightforward linear narrative. And I also really wanted to expand Paloma and Jane's stories. And then I had to kind of readjust the ways that those interplayed with Cassidy's. So it started out with a lot of my story and then got more and more fictionalized. But what I've been telling people is even a lot of the things that didn't happen, so many of them still have like the real feeling in them, like the real heart of them. So, Paloma might not have been in Prague, but maybe she was still struggling with finding home, like that kind of. I'm trying to think of a better example, but
yeah. And I also was just curious about, because you do write so beautifully about and longingly for West Virginia. So I just also wanted you to talk a little bit about what it was like to write about your home, and I'm also curious how it feels now that the book is out there and people that you grew up with can read it.
Yes. So, I mean, you'll see my 304 shirt. That's West Virginia, 304 for all. I love West Virginia. It's always going to be, when I hear the word home, I feel like that's probably always going to be the place that pops into my mind. But obviously, like, there were challenges growing up there. So yeah, I don't know. I think of it as a love story to West Virginia, as cliche as that sounds. And then also the dedication for the book is to my children. And I say, this is how I give you West Virginia. And so becoming a parent, I know you might want to talk about motherhood later, but when I became a parent, or actually I wrote the first draft when I was pregnant, and thinking about having my own kids and them not growing up there was kind of the first time I struggled with my decision to leave. And like knowing that I wanted to go somewhere and settle and have roots somewhere for them, but knowing that that place wasn't going to be West Virginia was hard. Even though I'm in the place that I want to be now. There's this Kimya Dawson song where she talks about there's something amazing raising babies in the place where you come from. And I know. And just thinking about not having that is hard because, my grandma had that, my dad had that, and then I had that. So I miss it. But this is like a way that I can kind of give it to them so that they can see, so that they can still be a part of it and know that like their history and their family is always intertwined with West Virginia.
Yeah, and you write about doing that through Noelle's character, which I thought was really beautiful, talking about how she's like so connected to her Mexican culture, but even being in Yeah.
Well, there's Dolly Parton's America podcast, where Jad Abumrad realizes that Dolly Parton and his father have become friends because they really both identify with the immigrant experience. And that was the first time it kind of clicked for me, like, oh, I'm kind of an immigrant, and starting to see my story as parallel to some stories of immigration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely, I felt that before leaving, like before returning to Alabama. It's like, so foreign to be out of the South or out of Appalachia. And
yes,
it's like very weird places. Yeah.
And then even things like I'll go somewhere and I'll mention that I'm from West Virginia. And I just saw in the chat, the Dolly Parton's America, the episode is called Neon Moss, the particular episode, I believe. And so I'll go somewhere and I'll say, oh yeah, I'm from West Virginia. And even people who I think of as really progressive will kind of be like, oh, bet you're glad you got out of there. And I just have to have this moment, like facing this little microaggression about the place where I grew up, where it's like, oh, do I talk about how I actually love it and care about that, and am not like just constantly thrilled that I left or whatever? So yeah.
I feel like I'm skipping ahead in the questions that I had written for you, because I feel like this one ties into that. And I sort of wrote this in my email to you, but what I found most important about the book was the very beautiful and hopeful ending that you write. And because so many queer characters and queer stories end in heartbreak and tragedy, and those are obviously very real experiences and deserve to be written and read and honored, but I don't think it's the only ending that we have as queer people. And so in the same way, I think that we have these stories about the South and Appalachia as being hostile, hateful, or unaccepting spaces for so many people. But we know that that's also not the reality. And so I think about that as a queer who fled Alabama, and then I returned with a lot of apprehension and feeling a little defeated. But thankfully, I was proven wrong, and I'm so glad to be here. So I think that this book could be really meaningful to queers and to Southerners who've felt that like non-belonging and the push and pull to leave places like small town West Virginia or Alabama. And yeah, I guess I just want you, did you think about that when you were writing the book about, I mean, every place is complicated, right? But that doesn't mean that we have to reject it, or that it's like not worth anything. And I like really appreciated how you uplifted West Virginia and its like capacity for being a home. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Part of a lot of what I feel when I think about how I left is guilt, because I have so many friends who stayed and made it a better place and made it a safe place to be. And I didn't. I mean, sometimes I think of it as like I ran away. And you know, then like life happens and my life is now here. And sometimes I wonder, I've read that literature can often be a kind of wish fulfillment. And so because my life circumstances led me to here, and I'm happy with where I am, but there's still this other version of me that went home and stayed. And so by writing it that way, I kind of felt like I was giving it to myself. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And yeah, I mean, I understand the guilt too. I think the guilt is what brought me back. And I don't think that that's like good. That shouldn't be the reason that, you know, I think it's okay that you don't live in West Virginia.
Well, thank you. But I am also like totally in awe of my friends who did return or did stay, and all the work that they've done, because it's really incredible, and I'm really proud of them. And I'm also really grateful that they still kind of let me keep that claim and like let me keep calling it home, let me write about it, like that I still get to belong. I'm really proud of them and really grateful for that.
Yeah, that was also something that I was wondering about while reading the book. You like sort of hint at this like shift that's happening in Buchanan, and like with the vegan coffee shop, I think, and the trans rights rally and the immigrant rights rally. And I was curious if that was like a Buchanan of your imagination, or if that
those are real. Those things are real.
Okay.
There have been fights against trans exclusive laws that like a lot of my friends are right there on the ground for. There's a coffee shop with vegan options, and there's the hate has no home here movement in West Virginia. And yeah, that's all real. I have heard, however, that in the last few years, even though there's been a lot of progress, there's been a lot of backslide as well. Like there's a queer educator at my high school who talked about how the school is getting to be a much safer place for queer students until the 2016 re-election. And now he has parents feeling emboldened to like call and say that they're pulling their kids out of his class because he's queer. Like just straight up, I know. So I think there's been a lot of progress made in a lot of ways. There's like a huge arts movement there that my friends are also totally making happen. But yeah, it's still like everywhere. It's also a scary time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also, in that, going back to talking about the book being a story where there's hope for both for West Virginia and for queer people. I connected with Cassidy, but I really just loved Grandma Jane because I saw a lot of my grandmother in her. And I wondered if I think about she could, in some ways, because of her age and race and religious views, embody some of those false assumptions that we have about West Virginia, and she proves us wrong. And I just wanted you to speak to the like unexpected, unconditional, radical love, and because that's also like a symbol of hope for me when old people can embrace you, like, and you have the same beliefs, but there's still so much love there.
Yeah, I love, so Grandma Jane is a lot of my grandma, Kathleen, who was very much about the unconditional radical love. Like her love was a very almost like physical, tangible presence in my life. And, you know, because she did grow up in the 30s and 40s in West Virginia, she definitely had some problematic views, but she always tried. And whenever she actually met people, like there was love and acceptance for them, even if she didn't quite know how to express it. So yeah, I really care about Cassidy and Jane's relationship in this too. And I also wanted it to be kind of some of her understanding to be kind of based in the shame that she felt about her own sexual history and reproductive history. And even though I wanted it to be clear that her understanding due to her age and her race and where she grew up were limited and maybe problematic, like that there was this still kind of intergenerational similarity or parallel with women experiencing shame about their sexuality that could let them understand each other. That
their relationship is just so amazing to me. And I also was thinking about how like Noelle and her abuela have a similar and just the like, I don't know if this was intentional, but the almost mirroring of the three women from the East Coast and the three women on the West Coast. I
think there's really something special about grandmas. Like you said that you write about your grandma. I feel like there's just something magical about grandmas. Like parents, I think even when our parents can be problematic, there's still something like kind of mythical about their lives for a lot of us. And then grandparents kind of have that, like often with like extra distance. So it allows us to like mythologize them even more maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I wanted to capture that kind of grandma magic for both of the women.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we should talk about Paloma, but she was a harder character for me to connect with, but I did love her story, and Cassidy had no compassion for her mom.
Yeah.
It grew through the story,
mm-hmm.
but and so I felt like I wanted to have more compassion for Paloma, but that their relationship was so hard to read sometimes.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know exactly what you're asking.
I'm not asking anything. But
yeah, it's really interesting to hear like the different people that people connect with, because it has not been like everyone loves Jane or everyone loves Paloma or everyone loves Cassidy. It's been a different, like lots of different answers.
Yeah. I know that we started talking about motherhood a little bit. And I was really interested in before motherhood, talking a little bit about abortion, which feels in some ways really central to the story. Like it sort of hinges on abortion and decisions around abortion. And I was talking to my friend the other night who's had an abortion, and she was talking about her experience of reading stories like fiction with abortion in it. And I was like, it feels so challenging, like it's such a challenging thing to put into a novel or a movie. And then I find myself like in this weird space because I'm like, oh, don't have the abortion, like, because I want children soon. And so then I'm just like, no, you should just do it. And then I'm like, what the fuck am I thinking?
Right.
And so I just wonder if you could talk about the experience.
Well, in the story where the character chooses not to have, I'm trying to not give spoilers for people who haven't read it. In the story where the character chooses not to have an abortion, it was really important for me to not have that be like a redemptive decision, for it to just be her decision, for it to not be like the right decision for everybody. And so even when she was struggling with that choice, I really, I wanted to make it clear, like still how fucked up the restrictions are. So I hope that I did that. Yes. And then also by having parallels with the character who did have an abortion, but decided to go through with it. Like it's still, there aren't any good, safe decisions regardless. Like there are challenges, unnecessary challenges and threats to people's safety, regardless of what they choose for their reproductive health. And that's kind of what I wanted to highlight with those two.
Yeah. And I think that's
parallel stories.
Yeah. And that's like really important, just coming on the heels of this.
Texas.
Texas. And then like how Hurricane Ida is like connected to abortion access or in access. So I was just thinking about that a little bit.
No matter the legality, no matter the time period, it's always just such an unnecessary pain in the ass, and it shouldn't be. And that's really understating it. Like I through my research, I learned that in the 40s, there were literally entire hospital wards filled with women who had had infections from unsafe abortions. Like that's a real part of that story. Like, and then even now when it's legal, like what are the barriers to access? Like it's just always, it sucks.
Right. Yeah. I just heard a story about a woman that wasn't able, she had miscarried, but hadn't, or I guess I don't know about the technical, but she was having to carry the stillborn to term, but she got sepsis and died because she wasn't allowed to have an abortion. So
it's I mean, it's really a nightmare. We could talk for the whole time about what's happening in Texas. It's horrific.
Yeah. I guess going off of that, we could talk about the themes of motherhood and also, I don't know, I was thinking about the queer family construction, like that I can't say much more about without giving things away, but I really liked the way that queer family was formed in the novel, and also the ways that mothering continued, after through adulthood, and sort of there's time for, I don't know if redemption is the right word, but I thought that was really beautiful that there was still time for
finding. Yeah, there's a character who is like not explicitly queer, but still finds like through friendship and community this kind of found family that yes, and that I hope helps us have more compassion and understanding for her.
Yeah, I think that, I thought her story was really beautiful, like toward the end, as she's finding that queer family.
And I think that that's really important for my friends who have stayed in Appalachia. Like there is such a sense of community that has stayed in very meaningful families and friendships.
I'm curious about your writing process, because I know in some of your bio it says that you are writing while the kids are sleeping. And I wonder, and also I know that you got this book like you did crowdsourcing.
I got it crowdfunded, through Inkshares. And so I had to get 750 pre-orders before I got my publishing contract. So, and I don't think that that's irrelevant to the type of story it is, because it is kind of niche. Like a queer Appalachian story, might not be the kind of thing that agents think, yes, like that's what's going to sell. Like there's an audience for that. But I knew that I knew enough people who would buy the book. And so I just kind of had to prove it beforehand. So my writing process, when the kids were little, was a lot of like, let's type as fast as I can while they're sleeping. But now they're older and I can feel less guilty about screen time. And so now it's like, ooh, while they're watching Bluey or whatever show I'm watching now. But I usually do NaNoWriMo for my first drafts, because I need some kind of outside structure to get me out of my head and just like into typing, almost stream of consciousness. And then I have to like really sit down with the story and figure out how to put it into a narrative structure. I do that. I edit it a little bit. I send it to beta readers and then on to editors.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
I started writing this book when I was pregnant with my oldest kid. So that was 9 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I mean, speaking of motherhood, like the way there's a birth scene in the book, and that scene changed so much because I wrote the first draft before I had given birth and then changed it after I'd actually experienced that. So when I started writing the first draft, I really identified with Cassidy. It was a lot of me. And I found myself, as I was editing, there was more and more of me in Paloma, because I was becoming a mother, and a mother of older children. So their characters, I think, got deeper as I got deeper into parenthood.
Oh, that's so lovely. I love that. We have a question. Did you keep tabs on how much time you actually spent writing the first draft that you submitted to Inkshares? And I'm talking
the first draft, I was through NaNoWriMo, and so that's 50,000 words in 30 days. And I wrote about an hour a day. So I like knocked it out in about 50 hours.
Wow.
But there is no way I could have kept tabs on on all the drafts after that. I mean, 9 years, it's so many hours. I don't think I even fully understood. Like, I'm just going to grab a book close to me. Like, it's a book. And speaking of Appalachian authors, like, it's this like, it just feels like a small thing, but the hours that an author puts like of their body and of their lives into this is incredible. It's a lot.
Yeah. I want to ask what's coming next, but I don't mean that to be like the last question because I have more, but it feels natural.
Well, I wrote a book that I'm quarrying now, which is, speaking of magical grandmothers, like a literal magical grandmother who she practices Appalachian granny magic, and she still visits her granddaughter after she dies, and the daughter gets wrapped up in opioids, which are such an epidemic in Appalachia right now, and the granddaughter has to call on her grandmother's magic to kind of help face that challenge.
Oh, wow.
I'm querying that. Again, it's been hard to find an agent who's interested. I've given it to a couple beta readers who really enjoyed it. I also wrote, so I started reading romance during the pandemic as a total just escape, like let my brain rest. Let me read something where I'm not doing it to learn craft. And then, of course, what I wanted to do was write a romance novel. So I drafted a Jewish ska rom-com that I'm working on. It's like two high school friends who used to be in a ska band together, and they drift apart, and then they're coming back together later in life because they're trying to find a ska album that disappeared from the internet. So that's my like really for fun project right now. I also have a contract with WVU Press to write about the West Virginia punk scene.
Cool.
Yeah, a nonfiction book. So I'm working on a lot of really different projects.
I feel like I want to read all of them.
Awesome.
So speaking of what you're reading, I love to know what writers read. I use it for like my own book recommendations, but also I just think that it's fascinating. So I'm curious what you think that, like, what books you think On Home is in conversation with, or books you would recommend that are similar to it.
Well, Misha Marin, who was originally planned to do this conversation, her book Sugar Run, it's definitely, I think, in conversation with that. But what I'm reading right now, I'm actually trying to think about like what other comp titles we gave. Heartspring Mountain by Robin MacArthur. I definitely say it's in conversation with that. It's in like angry conversation with Hillbilly Elegy, but don't read that. But what I'm reading right now is Patti Smith's Memoir, which is really, really fantastic so far.
That's great. I think I've started that. I don't think I've ever finished.
It's great. You know, I didn't really know anything about Robert Mapplethorpe, but it's all about her friendship with him, and getting to hear about what the Chelsea Hotel was like in the early 70s is fun. And she has, you know, she reads the book too. I'm listening to the audiobook, so I'm hearing it in her literal voice, which is really great. Speaking of writing and reading and my process, I listen to a ton of audiobooks, and I do that to kind of try to hone my own voice as a writer, because I feel like hearing actual voices helps me do that. So yeah, I'm listening to Patti Smith tell her story.
That's great. Do you read what you've written out loud? Does that help you in the process or no?
I do at some points in the process. Okay. Like there was one point pre-COVID where I sat in the YMCA in the community room and just read through my entire manuscript, like trying not to let anybody hear me. I feel like that helps with my voice and with character voices and with dialogue to make sure dialogue feels natural.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense, the dialogue part. I was also wondering what was the first book or one of the first books where you like really saw yourself in the writing?
So I used to always say Harriet the Spy, which I read as a kid, because she was observing everybody and like writing things about them. But I recently read that with my kid, and she's really awful, which makes me think about like, why was this the character that I related to? Like, she's really mean to all of her friends. She's like very spoiled. She's like cares more about her writing than she does about any of the people around her. Yeah, but that was the first book I remember reading as a kid where I was like, I'm going to be a writer. Like, I'm just like Harriet. And I got my little notebook and carried it around.
That's really cute. So you've known for a long time that you...
Yeah, I've always... So my dad was a writer. He wrote for and edited the local newspaper in Buchanan. And he wrote poetry and had his journals. And so I really identified with that.
Is part of Ken's character like based on your dad a little bit?
Yes, yes, it is. Okay. But he passed. So my Ken passed away when I was 13, and so there are a lot of conversations I didn't get to have with him that I kind of imagined through Cassidy's character, and you know, obviously things about him as an adult that I didn't understand or didn't know about him as a child that I had to kind of imagine my way into.
That's really beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about how you chose to do it through this like intergenerational storytelling of like weaving the different characters together.
That was my first editor, Matt Harry's idea. This book started when it was that 50,000 word version. It was about half the length that it is now. And it was mostly Cassidy. The story was really different. She worked at a feminist magazine and had an abusive boyfriend and didn't go to West Virginia at certain times in the book. Like, it was really different. Mm-hmm. And made different choices about pregnancy. And she just there were just kind of like little flashbacks to several characters in her family. So there were flashbacks to Jane's mom, Arzella. There were flashbacks to Jane. There were flashbacks to Paloma. There were flashbacks even to an early settler in the 1700s from her family who was settling on the farm where her family lives. But my editor said, like, these are the strong flashbacks and they need to be even more prominent in the story. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time building those stories out. And then, so Ingram, who distributes books, they had sales reps who read it and they said, it doesn't need it doesn't need Jane and Paloma. We want to sell this as like witty and snappy and like kind of a short, like poppy thing. And my editor at the time, and Avalon Radis, who is incredible, said, like, no, we're going to prove them wrong. This isn't supposed to be a witty, snappy, like, she's a millennial and she's a sex worker and she's like really hip. Like, that's not the kind of book this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be like intergenerational and epic. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of stuck to it and we're like, we're going to prove those sales reps wrong. It'll be okay.
I mean, it is witty and snappy and millennial.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really, it was like so relevant. And I like identified with a lot of the, like what Cassidy does and thinks. And so I really appreciated that. I don't know if this is putting you on the spot, but we have a viewer, Franny, who's asking if you would read an excerpt before we finish.
Yeah, I can read an excerpt.
Wonderful.
Let me find. So I read this at my my live event, but I'll read it here too. I'll fly away, oh glory. The words rang out, people's collective accents piercing the chilly air, vowels hitting palates before escaping, wrapped snugly in Y's and R's. Cassidy could imagine they were in the West Virginia of 100 years ago, the voices belonging to suspenders and gunny sack dresses. The words rose up in her and she fought them, held them down. She couldn't sing. These were the parents of the notably absent classmates who'd linked arms and swung around to Cotton-Eyed Joe at school dances where she and Simon had stood in the corner. This was the epitome of the state she had been dying to leave since she was 10. A moment later, though, she was singing. The words came from somewhere deep within and emerged to join the rising and swelling around her, like an old gospel sing, like a barn raising, like a tent revival, like all kinds of things she'd pushed down and tried to forget. The bare branches of the maple tree swayed above them, providing quiet accompaniment. She was vaguely aware of Noelle beside her, and she tried not to think about the look of shock that was inevitably on her friend's face. With eyes still closed, tears streamed down Cassidy's cheeks. She lifted her lids and looked around at the blurred faces. It didn't seem sad suddenly, this culmination of his life. It felt joyful and moving and like part of something that stretched as far back as time and would go on as long as people went on. A gathering, as people had always gathered and would always gather in places like this, where there were still woods to gather and sing in, honoring the joys and sorrows of humanhood. For the first time in a decade and a half, Cassidy considered the possibility that some things about West Virginia might be good. Even though she'd reluctantly agreed with her mom about how stifling this place was, the possibility that she might be able to understand what her dad had seen in it made endorphins bloom in her belly. The song transitioned into Will the Circle Be Unbroken, and Cassidy sang along to that too, really going for it now, belting it out, regardless of pitch, feeling the vibration of her voice blending with the others, the same deep buzz filling her body as the time she had chanted Om for a strip yoga show. The song wound down and Rock of Ages began. Somehow Cassidy knew that this was it. This must have been the hymn her dad, Grandma Jane, and her great-grandma had sung to Granddaddy when he was dying. She didn't know the words, so she hummed along, rocking back and forth, letting it consume her. As if it had been rehearsed, people began to break away from the circle and walk slowly back up the hill. The musicians played and walked, and Cassidy hummed. She marched slowly, falling in place toward the back of the procession. It was holy what had just happened, and she knew it. They all knew it. Everyone had felt the shift when they created something bigger than all of them. It was just like Grandma Jane had said. Cassidy didn't know what it was, but it was something. She'd been wrong. She'd been selfish and short-sighted. There were parts of her that fit here, no matter how out of place she'd felt. There was something in her blood. And then, interrupting her rhapsody, Noelle nudged her again. "How'd you like that hoedown?" she whispered. Cassidy had never felt so much as slightly annoyed at Noelle, but she suddenly felt physically violent. She clenched her fists. Cassidy stomped ahead ashamed. Noelle was right. It was all stupid, and she'd been stupid to get wrapped up in it, to let her grief delude her into thinking any of it had mattered. "Cass," Noelle called out, jogging to catch up. "Sorry, I shouldn't have joked." Cassidy stared straight ahead at the friends and family gathering on and around the porch. "I don't want to talk about it right now. I thought you hated this place." "That doesn't mean you get to."
That was just so much. I like connect to that, and the part about like we get to hate home, but like other people that don't know can't.
Yeah,
is like so real.
Yeah, exactly. And like this feeling of like there are parts of home in West Virginia where I feel like I feel it in my blood. I hear like old time music and I'm like, this is like, there's something in me that is connected to this. But then like other people's judgment can like snap me out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I sometimes feel that about football, which I hate, but when I lived outside of Alabama, I would watch Alabama football games because it was the only thing that existed that could tie me to home. And I don't know.
Yeah, WVU too. I was at some like very stereotypical Southern California brewery, which I mean, Southern California, I have the same love-hate relationship with it. But you know, I'm surrounded by, I think in the early chapter, she talks about people in the Ed Hardy shirts and like the 909 caps, and I'm surrounded by that. And there's this WVU basketball game on in the brewery, and suddenly I cared so much about that game, like they had to win. And you know, I don't care about basketball, but
so real. Yeah. This has been so wonderful. I'm so honored that I got to talk to you about your book, and I feel just so I don't know. It is so serendipitous that I because we're hoping to, you know, bring, I don't know, COVID, but bring you to Birmingham.
No, I know. So my husband graduates from Georgia Tech, or he did in May, and we were really hoping to go to his graduation in Atlanta in December. We'd already postponed it, and I was hoping to come see you all then, but doesn't seem like we're gonna have vaccinations for the kiddos. I'm gonna be able to make that happen. So I'm really glad we got to talk.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I read the book before it was time.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, and everyone should buy the book and read the book.
Buy it from Charis.
Yeah,
we are so thankful for you hosting us.
So ER, I think, is coming back.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you both so much. This was awesome. So excited to get to hear a little bit of the book and this wonderful conversation as well. I dropped a bunch of links in the chat to the books that you mentioned, as well as to the Dolly Parton's America podcast and to the very specific episode that you were referencing, which I loved. I think I love that podcast, and I think it's such a nice corrective from the hillbilly elegy conversations that we were having around that time. So if folks haven't listened to that podcast, they definitely should. We would love for you to click this teal button and buy On Home from Charis. We also, of course, welcome you to buy it from Burdock Book Collective. And, you know, we would love for y'all to stay in touch with Charis. So if you are new to Charis, please just, you know, check out our events. We're doing like an event almost every night. So we're virtual through the end of 2021 for sure, and probably at this point into early 2022. But all of our events are up at charisbooksandmore.com. I'll be adding captions to this and putting it up on our YouTube channel. If you're interested, you can go back and check out our long catalog of previous virtual events. That's always a fun way if you are feeling cooped up and not getting to have a fun Labor Day weekend out in the world. Definitely enjoy some of those previous events because it's a real treasure trove. And there are several other Appalachian writers that have visited with us. So thank you both again so much. This was really lovely. I really appreciate you stepping in, Katie. And I hope that you both stay safe and well.
You too.
Thank you.
Have a great night.